Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all having a good endpoint for the year so far. I am personally, and I'm excited for the new year ahead. 25, that is. For a good portion of this month, I've been spearheading my way through the backlog of games that I have on Steam, the paid ones, where I would go for the ones that I'd never played before in my life, and it's been a mixed bag overall. Some I ended up enjoying, some I hated, some I was disappointed in, but that's just how it is when you try everything that you have in your selection. The story-focused experiences I would commit to more and try to finish them if I enjoyed them, and the sandbox, arcade, or roguelike, or pick up and play experiences, I would play them just enough to see if I'd come back to them in the future. From the very start, I would remind myself that it was important to know that I didn't need to force myself to finish the game, and that I only needed to give it enough time to gauge whether I would enjoy it or not. If I didn't, then I would just drop it immediately and life would go on as normal, and I would latch on to the next thing to see if it clicks. I've played some great titles, some disappointing and downright horrible ones, like I said, that I dropped like an out-of-date glass of milk. But in between that, I've also been progressing outside of just gaming for the sake of gaming, finding my way into, putting more effort into things like 3D modeling and digital drawing and what have you. Learning how to use different shading techniques, using the Rigify add-on to make janky animations and simulating physics, stuff like that. Taking the time to learn Blender has been one of the best decisions that I've made this year, and it feels like that every time I use it, I'm always upgrading in one department or another with each model that I attempt to make or each experiment that I attempt to do. The learning curve in general is steep when it comes to 3D modeling, but it is also equally gratifying. The reason why I brought this up real quick is because in my quest to go through a lot of the games that I own, it is important to strike a balance between upgrading skills that you have, tradable skills or just skills of interest, as well as having a social life, as well as making times for games that I want to play. So just having a balance in between everything. In my recent adventures in the paid spectrum of games that I haven't touched for years, or haven't touched at all, I decided at random to try out a title from the late 2000s that reminds me of an era of horde-based games where you had a relatively simple but fun style of game that you could just hop into and play for as long as you want, getting the full experience each time you begin a new session, even if it was from 5 to 10 minutes. That game is Nation Red, one of many from the 2000s period that had you battling waves of enemies for as long as possible when you complete specific objectives. Horde-based games have morphed and shifted across various types of genres and shooters and arcade experiences, whatever, from co-op Horde FPS games or third-person games, endless wave-based games, bullet hells, and bullet heavens. You're not left wanting for choice nowadays. And either way, they all have that quick pick-up and play mentality in common with each other, and some might have more mechanics or more features to overwhelm you initially. You naturally, however, pick up things like that a lot quicker than you think, because you're generally not burdened by other aspects that require more attention. Nation Red isn't going to make you concentrate on a 100 plus hour experience like what Baldur's Gate 3 does, or pump 1,000 hours into something like Dota 2 and realize at the end that you're still dog shit. Red Nation is just a simple but fun classic horde-based shooter that has a comprehensible system at play that pretty much tells you all you need to know. The world's gone bad, zombies are everywhere, and in top-down piss filter fashion, you'll be slaughtering endless droves of them until you complete a mission, or until you fall by lasting as long as you can. I tried a demo of this game God knows how long ago, but all I remembered was roundhouse kicking a fat zombie only to still die anyways. It didn't really click for me at the time, and I ended up uninstalling it and just never thought about it again. So why did I buy this game and pick it up and play it out of any other game that I could have played instead? Well, honestly, mostly nostalgia, but not necessarily for the game itself, but the era that it came from. The era of zombie games that I remembered fondly, and the visual aesthetic and atmosphere tied to them. When I was playing Nation Red, I began thinking about the memorable times with games like Dead Rising 1 and 2, No More Room in Hell, Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, Dead Frontier, the Zombie Grinder Flash game that I covered before. The 2000s just had a lot of great zombie games that had that distinct vibe reminiscent of that period. Run down and dirty, everything feeling grindhouse, feeling ugly and horror-centric. Most of them anyways. Nation Red, though, isn't really anything remarkable from a visual standpoint, but it does have a charm of its own in terms of its simplicity and oddly satisfying gameplay that it has going for it. The premise is that in the 70s, an outbreak ensued across remote town Midwestern towns. Somewhere, I don't know. Anyway, the groups of people that would come together to, solve this problem would systematically hunt down these zombies until they were completely gone. 30 years later, though, these zombies had come back, and some were even carrying tools and guns, something that they couldn't do before. Which means that not only have they mutated, but they have also regained some of their cognitive learning skills to an extent. So much so that you can even fight a boss that shoots a minigun at you. Beyond that though, there's nothing more to it, nothing more to work with in terms of the story. And for the type of game that it was designed to be, it's not really the priority here. However, I generally appreciate titles that do go out of their way to create interesting worlds with expansive lore to uncover and reasons as for why you're doing what you're doing in the world. But there are many games out there that thrive without those reasons or those things. For example, N++ is one of my favorite platformers of all time, and that's a genre that I'm usually torn on because I either end up liking the game a lot, like N++, or I end up absolutely hating it, only to never touch it again. Nation Red just cuts the fluff, gives you guns and perks and says, just go shoot zombies and have fun doing it. The game does have some build variety to an extent, but not to the same degree as something like Vampire Survivors. The game didn't really make me feel like, however, that I had to start experimenting with every perk or weapon on the map. I just mindlessly went into the fray, and I picked up whatever toy was on the field like a child that saw the next new toy immediately. And while higher difficulties or goals for higher scores in the leaderboard would require more optimized play, I was never going out of my way to do those sort of things anyways, because the experience for me and what I was already enjoying was more than enough, and that I had a simple but fun arcade-inspired shooter for me that I could just hop into and play for a couple of minutes and then just stop whenever I got bored. And that's all I really wanted from Nation Red, and to an extent, I think that's what I got. It also has some of those 2000s physics that I love seeing in games. The animations themselves aren't too bad either. They're fairly smooth, at least for late 2000s arcade standards. The weapons themselves don't really sound that great, but they are fun to use because they also sort of tie in with the blood and the gore and the physics. And for Horde shooters, weapon feedback is a key factor that you should never ignore. If it doesn't feel right, it ain't right. How that feedback can resonate in someone can vary differently. For me, when it comes to shooters, I want that feeling of adrenaline. To have a weapon that creates this punchy and energetic, synergy between me and the gun, where it makes the combat really fun to engage in. One example I can think of, a game that does this really well, is Doom Eternal. The sound and physical impact of the weapons in that game is nearly unmatched. The game is amazing in terms of those two things. Nation Red, though, more so delivers on the physical side of things, like when you shoot down endless droves of zombies and you see the bloody parts splatter and you see the blood on the floor and also the gore explode and seeing the ragdolls ensue. Stuff like that is always fun to see in a 2000s game with ragdoll physics. And seriously, Endless Waves and 2000s physics are incredible combinations, and during my playthrough, I couldn't get enough of them. So sometimes, even though I might not necessarily like the game that much, it can sometimes offer a unique feeling that is wanted, and sometimes it can unlock memories or past moods that you didn't know you needed. Nation Red gave me a game where I didn't need to worry about a story. I could play this for 5 to 10 minutes and get enough of the experience from there. And I don't always want something that's large and expansive. I don't always want an epic sprawling adventure. I may not want to pick up something like Baldur's Gate and commit to a gigantic campaign. Maybe in the moment I just want something shorter, something simple, or an arcade-like experience that I can just pick up and drop whenever I want. Nation Red fits those categories quite well. It is a short and sweet game. The missions that you have, or the so-called campaign, are more like tutorials to introduce you to the set of maps and the bosses and enemy types that may appear in the other modes. As you fight, you level up, and you can select perks that'll give you a leg up in the fight, or a quick injection of relief as your health bar goes back up again. Nation Red has a nice assortment of weapons to toy around with, different preset characters, and a bundle of perks for various builds. Like other Horde games or wave-based titles, the main incentive to continue playing is either for the fun factor or for the leaderboarding system if you care about those sort of things. Me personally, I don't care for it at all. because I'm not really devoted to those sort of things personally, and I'm at a point in my life where I would rather use that time to build up on tradable skills or make room for other hobbies or be social, instead of just grinding a leaderboard for a game that I'm not really that invested in the first place. So I went through all of the missions that were pretty easy minus a few screw-ups and some of the other alternative modes that you also have. Each time you level up, you get a set of perks, and each perk adds a snowball effect that can make the fights easier to sustain longer runs. Of course though, you may end up in awkward positions where you may need to sacrifice an opportunity for a powerful perk by giving yourself some more health, or perhaps an upgrade for turrets that you can deploy on the field. You also have power-ups that you can use to your advantage, and the power-ups provide a layer of strategy in the runs that you do. But on the same token, you'll generally be doing okay for a few runs until it starts to get really hairy later on as it progresses, and by that point, more analysis and observation of your gameplay would become necessary. Having both the perks and the power-ups combined plays into the arcade nature of Nation Red, and collectively, they generate a lot of chaos that you look for in an arena-based wave shooter or horde shooter. On the harder difficulties, the choice and timing of power-up usage and what perks you select in sequence will become more crucial, but that's assuming you decide to commit to the game and work to optimize your gameplay further. For me though, the desire was never really there, as I never felt like that this would be a long-term game for me to play. Contrast this to a series of games that I played recently called Ubermosh, where in 90 seconds of overwhelming wave-based combat, the reactionary and frantic combat experience forced me at every turn to change my mindset towards the fight, which was to react rather than predict. Every time I tried to predict the actions of the enemies in that game, I would always get punished for it, but every time I died, I had that immediate desire to go right back into it, and that's always a good sign of a game like this, where dying motivates me to try harder, rather than having the opposite effect where I get demoralized from the experience and I just say, fuck this, I quit. Nation Red though doesn't really make me feel anything on either end of the spectrum, and that's probably a result of being checked out with the game after completing all of the missions and trying the game modes available. By the end of the experience, I was pretty much done. All this means is that some games just don't have that much longevity to them, and for me, Nation Red is one such case where I felt like I saw everything there was to see. The map variety is pretty limited to the Midwest desert-like setting that it operates on, so you won't really see anything beyond what's already there. Zombies come in different forms, but it doesn't end up mattering that much, because a lot of the time you'll be zoning out of what you're seeing on that screen and go into this like tunnel vision mode where you're just focusing more on the combat flow rather than just their appearance. However, in terms of the appearance, it's quite limited, and I would have liked to see more outfit variety personally. At least so they make up for it with various zombie types, which I guess makes it less monotonous, and some of the zombies have different challenges that you'll have to overcome. Some will carry weapons that damage you big time up close, and some will have a gun, shooting projectiles that you can actually dodge with a Dark Souls roll. The game has a lot of achievements too that you can go for, but I didn't find the game engaging enough, and I didn't like it enough to entertain the idea of 100%ing the game. It was just one of those titles that I tried for a period of time and then stopped when I wanted to move on. Overall, I had fun with the game, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a favorite, especially in a time where now we have so many other alternatives that offer everything this game has, but with more on top of it. In retrospect, I think I would have enjoyed this a lot more back in 2009 if I had played it back then. But now though, the enjoyment factor is pretty minimal for me, on top of the fact that there are just so many better alternatives that I can think of that it's not even close. But considering that I've played a variety of other Horde-based games, and considering how many improvements have been implemented in these type of games, I was expecting something a lot more simpler and, something a bit more dated in comparison. And on top of that too, my experience with this game was in single player. I don't know how many people are playing this or if anyone is playing this at all, but this is going to be one of those games where you can still have some fun on your own, but having someone else play with you will make it so much better. In fact, a lot of games like this are generally much better with other people anyways. So if you do get this game, I would highly recommend dragging someone over to your basement and making them play it with you. If you play it on your own, you'll still have fun, but the burnout will happen sooner and you'll move on like I had. I'm glad I tried this game. It's returned my genuine enjoyment for Horde-based games and reminded me of the beautiful simplicity behind them. That games are just that at the end of the day. No matter how complex or simple something is, we ultimately play them to have fun, and Nation Red's arcade DNA is a reminder that all we really want in a game is to have fun. Nation Red gives you a premise with some replayability value under its belt, with simple controls and an enjoyable gallery of gore and blood simulating 2000s piss-filtered physics, and none of it gets in the way of our desire for zombie carnage. It's nothing too special, and to be honest, you can do so much better if you have room for choice. But it's also really cheap, like a can of soft drink cheap, so you won't lose too much if you end up enjoying it. So give it a try anyways. Thanks for watching.